Montana Territory, spring of 1879, the wind came cold off the high ridges, and the girl chained to the fence had stopped crying an hour ago. Her name was Selah Adams, and her lips were cracked from sun and silence. Her wrists bled where the iron cuffs bit in. The fence behind her belonged to the Dry Creek trading post, where the owner's son had asked her to marry him, and she'd said no. The next morning she woke to rough hands dragging her from her cot and a voice saying, "You should learn your place, girl." Now, with dirt crusted to her dress and her boots gone, she sat slumped against the fence post, tied like an animal. One boot had fallen off in the scuffle. The other they had taken just because she was 19. She had nothing but her name and a stubborn heart. Her parents had died of the fever 2 winters back, her only family left in the 2-year-old graveyard behind the church. Since then, she'd worked the counter at the trading post, 5 days a week, 12 hours a day, just to earn a bed in the loft and stale bread for supper. And now, because she said no to a man with whiskey breath and a cruel streak, she was being punished in the open, where every rider and passerby could see her shame. But late that afternoon, a horse came from the south, hooves slow and steady, rider tall and straight in the saddle. He rode a blood bay, the kind that moved like it had something to prove. Dust clung to his shoulders and his hat was pulled low, but when he got closer, Selah's heart kicked hard. "Kassian," she whispered. Kassian Stokes had been her friend once, years ago, when they were both children. He was 3 years older, already nearly a man when she was still climbing trees and scraping knees. Then he left too many fights with his father, too much wildness in his eyes. Rumor said he was driving cattle down in Wyoming, riding with rough men, sleeping under the stars. She had not seen him in 5 years. He swung down from the saddle slow, his eyes locked on hers, and when he saw the cuffs, the color drained from his face. "What the hell is this?" His voice was low and tight. Selah could barely speak. Her throat was raw. "They chained me up." For saying no. He knelt beside her, pulled a knife from his belt, and sawed at the iron chain with a force that made his knuckles bleed. "Who did this to you?" "Clinton Murdoch. He asked me to marry him." Kassian's jaw clenched. "And when you said no?" "His father said I needed to learn obedience." The chains snapped, and the sound of it hitting the dirt was louder than thunder. Kassian caught her as she fell forward, too weak to stand. "I got you," he said. She blinked up at him. "Why are you here?" "Looking for supplies." He wrapped his coat around her shoulders and lifted her like she weighed nothing. "But I found something more important." He carried her to his horse, tied her gently into the saddle in front of him, and turned the bay toward the mountains. Selah leaned against his chest, her body shaking from cold and rage, and something else, something warm, blooming deep in her chest. "Where are we going?" "Home," he said. "I do not have one. You do now." They rode for 4 hours, climbing into the pine hills west of town until they reached a small cabin tucked behind a ridge. He carried her inside, laid her down on a bed with real sheets, and lit the fire. "I will bring water," he said. Selah caught his hand. "Why did you help me?" Kassian looked at her for a long time. "Because once, when I was a boy with scraped fists and no one who cared, you brought me bread and a blanket. Because you are brave, and because no one hurts you and gets away with it." Her eyes burned. "I thought you forgot me." "Never did." She fell asleep warm and safe for the first time in months. When she woke, the sun was rising through the window, and Kassian was sitting in a chair near the door, one hand on the rifle across his knees. He looked up when he saw her stir. "You are safe here," he said. Selah sat up slowly. "What happens now? What do you want to happen?" Her voice shook. "I want to stay." He nodded once. "Then stay." She swung her legs over the side of the bed and stood. Her knees wobbled, but she stayed upright. Kassian stepped forward, steadying her with a gentle hand on her arm. "I will make coffee," he said. "And I will sweep your floor," she answered, smiling. They shared breakfast in front of the fire, and Kassian told her about the ranch he was building. Just 30 acres and a few head of cattle, but it was his. The land was hard and the winters cruel, but he had a roof and a future carved out of cedar and grit. Selah listened, her eyes softening with every word. "You built all this?" "I built it hoping one day someone would want to share it." Her breath caught. "And now," he looked at her, and something raw moved across his face. Now I know exactly who I built it for. Outside, the wind picked up. But inside, the cabin was warm and Selah's heart felt steadier than it had in years. I never wanted to belong to someone like Clinton, she said, but I would not mind belonging here. Kassian reached out and touched her cheek, rough thumb brushing soft skin. You do not have to say yes to anything, not ever again, but if you choose me, Selah, I swear I will never let you feel small. I already feel safe, she whispered. They stood like that for a long time, the fire crackling behind them and a new kind of hope rising between them, quiet and sure. Outside, the mountains held the sky, and the fence back at Dry Creek stood empty. By the third day, Selah could stand long enough to wash her face in the basin beside the stove and pour beans into a pot without spilling. The soreness in her shoulders lingered, but it had dulled to a manageable ache. She moved slow, careful with every motion, but she moved. That was enough. Kassian had gone out to check the fence line after breakfast. He'd left a note scratched in pencil on the table, one word, back. She didn't need more. His movements made sense now, quiet, steady, deliberate. He didn't explain things unless she asked, and she found she liked it that way. The cabin's walls were plain pine, chinked with clay and wool. She ran her fingers along the shelf above the hearth, where a row of river stones sat in a line, each one worn smooth and flat. One had a crack running through it like lightning. She picked it up, turned it in her hand. The door opened behind her. She didn't startle. Kassian set his hat on the peg near the door and stepped inside, boots trailing pine needles. South gate's gone slack. Elk busted through sometime in the night. She set the stone down. Need help fixing it? He paused, eyes on her face. You up for that? Could do with being useful. She wiped her hands on her skirt. I won't slow you down. He gave a nod. All right then. Bring your coat. The trail to the south gate wound through a narrow stand of lodgepole pines. Snow still clung to the shadows, though the ground was softening with melt. Kassian carried a coil of wire and a hammer. Selah followed with an armful of cedar stakes. They didn't talk much. The wind moved through the trees. A magpie called once and went quiet. When they reached the gate, Kassian crouched to inspect the damage. Split here, he said, tapping the post. Need to dig a new holdfast. Selah rolled up her sleeves and took the spade from his pack without being asked. She drove it into the earth, each thrust sending a faint tremor up her arms. He watched for a moment, then began measuring the line with twine. You always take care of everything yourself, she asked, not looking up. Most times. Why? Hard to trust someone to do it right. She set her boot to the spade's edge and pressed down. You trust me to help? He didn't answer right away. I do, she paused, leaning on the handle. Kassian, what did you do all that time you were gone? He stood, brushing dirt from his palms. Worked cattle down near the Platte, rode fence, broke horses, got into trouble more than I should have. You ever think about coming back? I did, plenty. But I wasn't ready, she turned toward him. Ready for what? He met her eyes across the open earth. For this, for staying put, for building something more than a bedroll and a campfire. They worked until the sun dropped behind the hills. The new gate stood firm, the wire pulled tight. Selah's hands throbbed and her skirt was streaked with mud, but there was a brightness in her chest she hadn't felt since her parents died. When they reached the cabin again, Kassian lit the lamp while she stirred the coals and added kindling. The fire caught with a low sigh. I'll heat water, she said. You should rest. He started to argue, then thought better of it. I'll be out back, he said. Need to check the trough. She filled the kettle and set it to boil. Her palms stung from the shovel's handle, but she didn't mind. When he returned, she was pouring water into the basin, steam rising in curls. Let me see your hands, he said. She hesitated, then held them out. He took them in his, turning them gently. You opened one? I'll clean it. He reached for a small tin on the shelf, opened it, and dipped 2 fingers into the salve. This'll sting. I'm not afraid of pain. I know. He worked the ointment into her skin with slow care, wrapping a strip of clean cloth around each palm. She watched him, the way his brow furrowed in concentration. You learned to do this on the trail, she asked. Picked it up from a woman in Laramie. Her boy got kicked by a mule. She let me stay the winter in exchange for mending boots and tending stock. She taught me a few things. Selah's voice softened. You were kind to her. She was kind first. The lamplight caught the edge of his jaw, the scar that ran beneath his ear. She hadn't noticed it before. How'd that happen? She asked. Bar fight, he said. Didn't duck fast enough, she smiled, then winced as the cloth tightened. You seem quieter than a man who starts fights. I don't start them. He tied the last knot, but I finish what needs finishing. She let her hands drop to her lap. You didn't ask what I want to do next. I figured you'd tell me when you were ready. I want to stay, not just rest, not just hide. I want to do something worth waking up for. His expression didn't change, but something eased in his shoulders. Then we'll build it. Selah stood, stepped closer. Together, he looked at her, eyes dark and steady. If you'll have me here, not out of fear or debt, but because you want to. She reached for his hand, the one that had mended hers. I want to. He didn't kiss her, not yet. But his thumb brushed the edge of her wrist, slow and reverent, and she felt more seen than she ever had. That night, she slept with the window half open. The wind whispered through the crack, but it didn't sound like a threat anymore. It sounded like the world making room. The thaw came slowly to the hills, seeping through the ground like a promise too long withheld. Kassian's pasture turned soft underfoot, and sap rose in the pines. Selah moved easier now, her body no longer stiff from cold or bruises, though the skin around her wrists still bore faint marks where the iron had cut deep. She didn't cover them. Some things were meant to be seen. That morning she worked beside Kassian in the small shed behind the cabin, brushing down the old draft mare he'd traded for last fall. The horse, gray and sway-backed, leaned into the strokes like she remembered gentler times. You name her yet? Selah asked, brushing along the shoulder where the winter coat still clung. Hadn't thought to, Kassian said, tightening the cinch on the saddle he'd been repairing. You want to? Selah looked at the mare, at her quiet eyes and the way she shifted her weight like every step still mattered. Mercy, she said. Kassian ran a thumb over a worn stirrup leather. That fits. They worked in silence a while longer. The sun crept over the ridge, casting long gold stripes through the slats of the shed. Selah set the brush down and leaned against a beam. Why didn't you ever write? She asked. He didn't look up. Wasn't sure you'd want to hear from me. I would've. I figured you'd have made a life. Married someone with a proper name, someone who didn't leave. I nearly did, she said, voice low, but not for love, just to survive. Kassian straightened. That shouldn't have been your choice to make alone. Well, it was. She stepped outside, the air cool against her face. But I'm not alone now. He followed her into the yard, wiping his hands on a rag. No, you're not. They walked the ridge that afternoon, checking the line where the mountain dropped off into a narrow draw. Deer tracks crisscrossed the mud and a hawk circled overhead. Selah paused near a bluff, boots sinking slightly in the soft earth. My mother used to say spring was the season God used to remind us we hadn't been forgotten, she said. Kassian stood beside her, arms crossed, gaze on the horizon. She was a sharp woman. She was tired near the end. I think she hung on longer than she should have, for my sake. Folks do that, carry more than they ought. He glanced at her. You still carry her, every day. She turned to him. You ever carry your father? Kassian's jaw worked for a moment before he answered. Only the parts I need to unlearn. They didn't speak after that. They just stood and let the wind move around them, like it might blow old ghosts into softer shapes. That night, Selah stayed beside the fire while Kassian worked outside, splitting wood by the light of the moon. She mended a tear in one of his shirts, fingers steady even as her thoughts turned restless. When he came in, arms dusted with sawdust, she met him at the door. There's something I want to do, she said. He looked at her, waiting. I want to file a land claim. There's a parcel west of here I've seen cottonwoods, good soil near the creek. Belonged to a widow who passed last fall. No one's touched it. Kassian didn't speak right away. You want to leave? No, she said. I want to own something, not just be kept safe. I want roots. His eyes searched hers. You'd stay close, half a mile, maybe less, he nodded. I'll ride with you to the clerk, help you stake it. She stepped closer. You're not surprised, I'm proud. She rested her forehead against his chest. I don't want to be someone you rescued. I want to be someone you respect. He tilted her face up, his hand warm on her jaw. Selah, you've never been anything else. She kissed him, then slow, sure, her hands curled into the fabric of his shirt. Not out of desperation, not to be saved, but because she wanted him, here now, with the fire behind them and the future not so far ahead. When they parted, Kassian leaned his forehead to hers. "We'll build it with both our names on the deed," Selah smiled. "And I'll plant asters near the door." Outside, the wind had calmed. Inside, the hearth burned steady, and between them, something stronger than memory had begun to take root. The land clerk in Virginia City had a limp and a habit of chewing licorice root, which stained his teeth near black. His office smelled of old paper and stove ash. Selah stood before his desk with Kassian beside her, the deed freshly inked and in her name alone. "Anything else you need from me?" the clerk asked, squinting at her through wire-rimmed spectacles. "No, sir," Selah said, folding the paper with care. "This is all I came for." He nodded once and waved them off, already turning back to his ledger. Outside, the wind carried the scent of thawed earth and horse dung. The sun hung high, bright but brittle. Selah let her fingers rest on the edge of her saddle before swinging up. Kassian mounted beside her, and they turned west, the hoofbeats of their horses muffled by the mud-soft road. He didn't speak until they were clear of town. "You weren't nervous?" "I was. Didn't show." She gave a small shrug. "I've had practice hiding it." They rode on in silence, passing a freight wagon stalled in a ditch and a boy with a slingshot perched on a fence rail. When the last rooftops of town disappeared behind them, Kassian cleared his throat. "I've been thinking about building another room." Selah turned to look at him, brows lifted. "If you're to stay nearby," he said, "you'll need space when you visit. And I'd rather you not have to sleep on a cot if the weather turns. I've slept colder places than your floor." He didn't smile, but his voice softened. "Still, I want it right." Selah tilted her head. "You don't have to earn my company, Kassian." "I'm not trying to earn it," he said. "I'm trying to make room for it." By the time they reached the edge of her newly claimed land, the sun had dipped low enough to throw long shadows across the fields. A line of cottonwoods marked the creek, their bare branches swaying like slow dancers in the wind. Selah dismounted, boots sinking slightly in the wet grass. She walked a few paces ahead, then turned in a slow circle, eyes scanning the slope, the way the hills held the creek in a gentle curve. "It's not much yet," she said. Kassian came up beside her. "Neither was my place when I started." She glanced over. "What was it like?" An empty clearing, sod roof that leaked, spent the first winter chasing foxes out of the root cellar. He looked toward the trees, then back at her. "I could help you lay the foundation." "If you want." Selah took a breath, the wind catching her hair at the temple. "I'd like that." They walked the boundary together, marking the corners with stones and small flags of cloth. Kassian tied each one with deliberate care, his fingers steady even when the wind pulled at the fabric. "You ever think about what you'll do after the house is built?" he asked. Selah paused, one hand resting against a cedar trunk. "Grow herbs, keep hens. Maybe offer stitching and mending once folks know I'm here. You'll be good at that." She looked at him, the last light catching the side of his face. "And you? I'll keep breaking ground, maybe add more head to the herd." "But I don't want to do it all alone anymore." She didn't answer right away. Instead, she stepped closer and reached for his hand, their fingers meeting between them like something already half known. "I don't want to live separate," she said quietly. "Not really. I want to have something that's mine, but I want you in it." His hand tightened around hers. "Then let's build both." They stayed until the stars pushed through the dusk. Then they rode back to his cabin together, side by side, the sound of the creek behind them and the future not waiting but walking with them. By mid-April, the ground had dried enough to dig. Kassian brought his tools from the shed spade, level, square, and Selah marked out the corners of her cabin with maple stakes. They worked side by side through the warm hush of morning, sweat rising under their shirts, hands blackened with soil and pine pitch. The quiet between them had shifted, no longer cautious but companionable, like a shared rhythm that didn't need naming. Selah wiped her brow with the corner of her sleeve. "I'll need to send word to Bozeman. There's a carpenter there who travels out for smaller builds." "He did the schoolhouse." Kassian adjusted the line of twine between two stakes. You want him to frame it? I want it done right. I've never built anything that had to stand in the wind. He nodded once, then crouched to check the depth of the trench. You've got an eye for angles. I watched my father build most of our house, she said, squinting against the sun. Didn't realize I was learning until now. They broke for lunch beneath a cottonwood, the creek running slow behind them. Selah shared cornbread and sliced apples she'd wrapped in oilcloth. Kassian poured water from his canteen into her tin cup without a word. She leaned back against the bark, stretching her legs. I saw a wagon on the road this morning, 2 women and a boy. Looked like they were headed toward Ruby Valley. More folks settling in, Kassian said. That'll bring trouble before it brings comfort. Maybe, she said, but it feels good to see people choosing to stay. He watched the water move over the rocks. You ever think about what else you want once the cabin's up? She tilted her head. I want a garden, enough to trade if I can, maybe keep bees someday. His mouth twitched slightly. You don't mind stings? I mind being idle more. He tossed a pebble into the stream. If you had all those things, would you still want to keep coming back to my place? She looked over at him slowly. I never planned to stop. They finished the meal in easy silence. After, Kassian walked the far edge of the lot where the trees gave way to open slope. Selah followed, boots soft in the grass. He stopped at a rise that overlooked both his land and hers. From here, the cabin he'd built sat nestled between 2 ridgelines, smoke rising faint from the chimney. Her cleared lot stretched out behind them, marked only by their fresh diggings and a tangle of wild chokecherry. I'd like to raise the roofline on mine, she said, so it doesn't look like an afterthought beside yours. I could cut the ridge beam for you. He turned toward her. I'll help with anything you want, she searched his face. And what do you want, Kassian? He looked out over the valley. I want you to know you're free, but I also want to grow old with you. Selah stepped forward, closing the space between them, her fingers brushing his. Then don't just help me build it with me. He reached for her hand, slow and certain. You sure? I've never been more. That evening they rode into town again, this time to order lumber and nails from the general store. Selah placed the list on the counter herself, voice steady. The clerk, a thin man with a crooked nose, raised his brows when she handed over the payment. You building alone? He asked. No, she answered. With someone I trust. They left with the promise of delivery by week's end. On the ride back, the sky turned lavender and the hills cast long shadows across the road. Selah leaned slightly toward Kassian as they rode, her shoulder brushing his. That night they didn't sleep in separate rooms. Selah stood at the hearth while Kassian banked the fire, and when the flames had settled low, she crossed to him and rested her hand on his chest. I don't want to wait. He didn't answer with words. He lifted her hand to his lips and kissed her palm, then led her upstairs. In the quiet that followed, as the wind creaked against the shutters and the world turned slowly under them, they lay tangled in each other's warmth. Selah's head rested over his heart, and he held her like she was already part of him. The next weeks passed in rhythm, clearing, cutting, hammering, resting. The carpenter arrived with a wagon load of beams and a calm, methodical way of speaking. Kassian worked beside him during the day while Selah kept to the garden and the interior plans. By early June, the cabin stood framed, roofed, and ready for walls. On the longest day of the year, they hung the front door together. Selah drove the final hinge pin in with firm, even strokes. When it was done, she stepped back and looked at her door, her home. Kassian wrapped an arm around her waist. It's good work. It's ours, she said. They sealed the windows with oilcloth and beeswax. Selah made curtains from unbleached muslin. They moved in before the floor was fully laid, sleeping on a straw mattress and waking to the sound of birds nesting in the rafters. That summer brought more settlers, more wagons, more talk of building a church and school closer to their side of the valley. Selah began stitching for neighbors, mending, fitting, sometimes sewing entire dresses from scratch. Kassian traded lumber and helped a new family raise a barn. One evening, as the sun set behind the cottonwoods, he brought out a small tin box. Inside lay a simple ring iron, polished, set with a piece of river pearl. "I found it in the creek," he said. "Didn't think much of it then, but now I do." She took the ring, turning it between her fingers. "You want to marry me? I already chose you." This is just naming it out loud. Selah slid the ring onto her finger. Then yes. They married under the cottonwoods with the breeze in the leaves and the creek running behind them. No preacher, no crowd, just hands joined and vows spoken soft and sure. Years passed with the seasons. The cabins aged under snow and sun. The valley filled with the sound of children's laughter and the ring of hammers. Selah kept bees, grew herbs, and taught young girls how to stitch seams that would hold. Kassian raised cattle, built fences that didn't sag, and kissed his wife each night like the first time. They never left. They never had to. And on quiet evenings, when the fire burned low and the day's work lay behind them, they sat on the porch, side by side, watching the sky turn to stars. She would reach for his hand, and he would give it always. They had built something lasting together.